Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are wading into some really fascinating and honestly pretty complex waters. If you have spent even like 5 minutes on social media lately, especially if you've ventured onto witch talk or the aesthetic corners of Instagram,
Yeah.
you have definitely noticed a shift. Witchcraft isn't just something you see in history books anymore. It is having this massive mainstream cultural moment.
It really is. It has moved from the fringe right to the center of the feed. I mean,
Yeah.
it's incredible to see how visible it has become.
Exactly. It's aesthetic videos of altars, tarot readings showing up on your For You page, tutorials on candle magic. It feels so accessible.
Like it's all just one click away.
Right. But, and here's where we need to pause and really look at what we're consuming. With all that visibility comes a lot of confusion and, frankly, a fair amount of friction.
Right. Because when spiritual practices become trends, the context often gets stripped away. You see the aesthetic, the vibe, but you miss the lineage, the history.
And that leads us to the core tension we're exploring today.
The distinction between open and closed practices.
We are basing this deep dive on a really comprehensive guide called Sacred Boundaries, Navigating Open and Closed Witchcraft Traditions. And what strikes me about this text is that it frames the conversation so differently than, the usual arguments you see blowing up online.
How so?
It states right up front that the goal isn't to limit curiosity. It's to move us toward honoring culture.
Which is such a critical pivot. I think when people hear words like boundaries or closed practice, they immediately feel defensive. It feels like gatekeeping.
Oh, absolutely. Like someone is telling them they aren't allowed to learn something.
But this guide argues that understanding these boundaries is actually how you practice responsibly. It's about recognizing that, in a globalized world, not everything is for everyone, and unpacking why that is actually a good thing.
So let's lay the groundwork. I think for a lot of people, witchcraft is just one big bucket. You throw in some sage, some crystals, maybe a spell, and it's all the same thing.
But it's not. The source makes a huge point right at the start. Witchcraft is not a single religion. Not at all. It's an umbrella term. It covers a massive range of things: folk magic, ceremonial magic, various pagan paths, specific cultural traditions. It's a tapestry, not a monolith,
And within that tapestry, some threads are available for everyone and some are protected.
for very specific reasons, yes.
Let's start with the accessible side of the spectrum, just to set a baseline. The source calls these open practices. How do we define that?
So an open practice is a spiritual or magical tradition that is available to anyone, regardless of their ancestry, their culture, or their background. The defining characteristic here is accessibility.
So you don't need a specific bloodline.
No, and usually you don't need a formal, gate-kept initiation to get started.
This sounds like the stuff that feels most familiar to the modern sort of eclectic practitioner, the stuff you see in bookstores.
Precisely. These traditions generally welcome practitioners from all backgrounds. They encourage what we call eclectic practice, where you adapt things you study independently.
And you express yourself personally through it.
Exactly. It's very much about self-initiation. The barrier to entry is just your own interest and dedication.
The source lists some specific examples, which I think is helpful. It mentions things like eclectic witchcraft, modern paganism,
Yeah.
general candle magic.
And astrology is a huge one that falls into this bucket.
Right, astrology, tarot, divination in general. The vibe the source describes here is intentionally inclusive.
Think of it like a public library. The tarot system, for example, especially the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, is designed to be a system of universal archetypes. Nobody's going to ask to see your family tree before you buy a deck,
Right, it's a system built to be adapted.
and used by whoever feels called to it to understand, the human experience.
Okay, so that's the open side. Now we have to cross over to the closed side. And this is where the nuance is really important because I think people confuse closed with secret.
That's a huge misconception.
So what actually makes a practice closed?
A closed practice is a tradition restricted to members of a specific culture, community, or lineage. It's not a free-for-all. To participate, you usually needs specific permission, a formal initiation, or a direct ancestral connection.
So you can't just buy a paperback on Amazon and decide you're a high priestess of that tradition.
Exactly. These are often tied to living cultures, and that's a crucial distinction. We aren't talking about ancient, dead civilizations where we are all just guessing.
We're talking about marginalized communities that are still here functioning today.
Yes, they have specific protocols, specific spirits, and specific rituals that are safeguarded within that community structure.
The examples the source gives are things like certain indigenous spiritual traditions, specific African traditional religions, often called ATRs, and some forms of folk magic tied to a specific region.
Yes. And the vibe here isn't we're being mean and don't want to share. It's we are protecting something specific that belongs to us.
And that leads us to the big question, the why. Because, I'll play devil's advocate here, when a modern seeker, someone genuinely curious, hears, you can't do this, the knee-jerk reaction is often, why not?
Isn't spirituality universal?
Yeah.
Why are we gatekeeping magic?
Exactly, that's the one.
That is the most common pushback. But the source breaks this down into three really compelling reasons why closed practices exist, and they really dismantle the idea that this is just about being exclusive.
Let's hit the first one because it carries the most historical weight, cultural survival.
This is the context we just cannot ignore. Many of the traditions we are talking about, indigenous practices, African traditional religions, were targets of erasure. We are talking about colonization, forced conversion, slavery, systemic oppression.
People were literally killed for practicing these things.
Absolutely. So closing the practice or keeping it hidden wasn't about being a secret club. It was a survival strategy.
A defense mechanism.
It was a defense mechanism. When you have an outside force trying to erase your identity, keeping your spiritual practices closed, secret, and underground is how you ensure they survive to the next generation. It's an act of resistance.
That changes the perspective entirely. Because if you look at it that way, when someone from outside that culture today tries to just take bits and pieces because it looks cool on Instagram.
It feels like a continuation of that colonization.
Yeah.
It trivializes the struggle. It's essentially saying, I want the aesthetic of your magic, but I don't want the burden of your history.
It treats a survival tool as a fashion accessory.
Precisely.
The second reason the source give is spiritual safety. Now, this one is fascinating because it treats magic not just as a psychological exercise, but as something real.
And potentially volatile.
Yes.
The source takes a very practical stance here. Some traditions involve specific spirits, energies, or rituals that require proper training. It's not just lighting a lavender candle and wishing for peace.
Right.
If you are dealing with specific entities or heavy energetic work, doing that without guidance can be misunderstood at best and actually harmful at worst.
It reminds me of the analogy of electricity. You can appreciate that electricity powers your home, but you wouldn't try to rewire your main breaker box just because you watched a 5-minute video.
You'd burn the house down. That is a perfect analogy. The initiation processes in these closed traditions aren't just bureaucratic coups. They are training. They are safety protocols. They prepare the practitioner to handle the voltage, so to speak.
So it's for the seeker's own protection, in a way.
In many cases, yes. To ensure that the person engaging with these forces knows how to ground them safely.
And the third reason is just, well, basic human decency, respect and consent.
This brings it back to a very relatable level. The source uses this analogy. You wouldn't just walk into a stranger's private family reunion, sit down and start eating their food without an invitation.
Right, you'd be kicked out. It doesn't matter if you're hungry or if you really like their potato salad. You weren't invited.
Exactly. Spiritual spaces are intimate community spaces. Just because you can see it online doesn't mean you have an invitation to enter.
Yeah.
You need consent from the community.
I think that reframes it really well. It's not about hiding the truth, it's about privacy. But there is an aha moment in the text that I really want to highlight, because this is where the ego gets involved. The source says explicitly, closed does not mean better.
Yes. This is such a common trap. People think, oh, if it's secret, it must be the real magic. The open stuff must be watered down.
Right, like the open stuff is the kids' menu and the closed stuff is the gourmet meal. We always want what's behind the velvet rope.
But the source completely debunks that. Open practices are not lesser. Closed practices are not superior. They just serve different purposes. You can have a profoundly deep, life-changing spiritual practice using only open traditions.
You aren't missing out on the good stuff by respecting boundaries.
Not at all.
I love that. It takes the pressure off. You don't have to hunt for secrets to be a real practitioner. Okay, so we've defined the landscape, but now we have to talk about the messy middle, the fine line between appropriation and appreciation.
This is where it gets tricky for a lot of people. Because naturally, we see things in other cultures that are beautiful. We admire them. The question is, how do we interact with that admiration without crossing the line into theft?
So let's look at the good first. What does appreciation look like, according to the source?
Appreciation is active, but respectful. It involves learning. It involves giving credit to the source cultures, acknowledging where a practice comes from instead of pretending you invented it. It means supporting creators from that culture.
And the key kicker here, practicing only what is openly shared.
Right. You can admire a closed ceremony from a distance, you can read about it, you can appreciate the beauty of it, but appreciation stops before you try to replicate it yourself.
Which brings us to the bad, appropriation.
Appropriation is rooted in entitlement. It's using sacred elements without permission. It's ignoring the cultural context, like taking a statue of a deity that represents a very specific story and just using it as cool decor because it matches your curtains.
Or worse, monetizing it.
That is a huge one. Profiting from a closed tradition that isn't yours is a major red flag. This happens a lot with, say, shamanic certification courses, sold by people with no connection to those lineages.
And the salad bar approach, I feel like that is the most common form we see today.
The spiritual salad bar. That's where you take a little of this indigenous practice, mix it with a Hindu mantra, throw in some Kabbalah, without understanding that those systems might have completely contradictory cosmologies.
It dilutes everything and respects nothing.
And the source have a maxim here that I think everyone should remember. Intent matters, but impact matters more.
That's the golden rule, really.
It is. You might have the best intentions. You might genuinely love a culture. But if your impact is that you are commodifying their sacred objects or talking over their voices, your good intentions don't negate that harm.
There is a nuance here that the source makes that I want to clarify because I think this trips people up. The distinction between learning and practicing.
Yes, this is crucial. The source says explicitly, you can learn about closed practices. You can study the history. You can listen to voices from that tradition. You can read the anthropology books.
So knowledge isn't forbidden. We aren't advocating for ignorance.
No, ignorance is not the goal. But learning is not the same as practicing. Think of it like this. You can read everything there is to know about heart surgery. You can understand the mechanics. But that does not give you the right to pick up a scalpel.
Or, you can study the Catholic Mass, understand all the theology, know the Latin. But if you aren't an ordained priest, you cannot perform the Eucharist.
Exactly. You can study it, but you cannot perform the rituals, claim the titles, or, and this is a big one, teach it to others.
That distinction between being a student of history and a practitioner of magic clears up so much confusion. Okay, so let's get practical. Let's say I'm a listener, I'm vetting my own practice, and I'm wondering, is this thing I've been doing actually closed? The source gives us a checklist.
It does. It's a great tool. If you aren't sure, ask yourself these 4 questions. First, is this tied to a living culture? Again, not ancient Egypt, but a culture existing today.
Okay.
Second, does it require initiation? Is there a formal entry point that I just, bypassed? Third, do practitioners within that tradition say it's closed?
And fourth.
Am I learning this from insiders?
Yeah.
Or am I learning it from some other outsider who might have appropriated it themselves?
That third one seems like the ultimate tiebreaker. Do practitioners say it's closed?
Right. And this leads to the best advice in the text. When in doubt, listen to the people within that tradition. If indigenous people are saying, please don't buy white sage bundles from big box stores because it's impacting our access to our sacred medicine, just listen to them.
Even if you don't fully get it.
Even if you don't fully understand all the spiritual mechanics, defer to the people whose culture it is.
Now, we've talked a lot about protecting closed practices, but the source also has a reminder about how we treat open practices.
Yes, this is so important. Just because something is open, like tarot or candle magic, doesn't mean you can be sloppy.
Open does not mean careless.
Exactly. These practices still have cultural origins. Tarot comes from Renaissance Italy and France. Herbalism has deep roots in European folk medicine. You still need to approach them with humility.
And credit your sources.
Always credit your sources. Just because nobody's going to stop you at the door doesn't mean you shouldn't wipe your feet before you enter.
I think that's really important. It elevates the whole conversation beyond just what am I allowed to take to how do I show up with respect in general.
Yeah.
But I want to address the elephant in the room. The source mentions the fear and shame that comes up.
It's true. A lot of people feel like they're walking on eggshells. They're afraid of being canceled or being called out on the internet. And that fear can make people really defensive.
Or it makes them just give up entirely. They think, well, everything is problematic, so I'll do nothing.
Right. And the source addresses this with so much compassion. It reminds us that mistakes do not equal malicious intent. We have all grown up in a consumerist society that encourages us to consume everything.
Food, land, culture.
Unlearning that takes time.
So if you realize, oh no, I've been doing something that is actually a closed practice, what's the move?
You stop. You listen. You adjust. You don't spiral into shame. Shame isn't productive. Ethical practice is ongoing. It's not about being perfect from day one. It's about being willing to change your behavior when you learn better.
Growth comes from listening. I love that. So as we wrap up, we need to talk about the mindset shift. Because ultimately, this isn't just about a list of do's and don'ts.
No, it's about how we view our place in the world.
Mm.
And the source summarizes the ideal mindset so beautifully. Curiosity without entitlement, learning without claiming, honoring without copying.
Curiosity without entitlement. That hits hard. It's being interested in the world without assuming everything in it is for you.
And that leads to the final reframe the source offers. It suggests we stop thinking about this in terms of restriction, what I can't do, and start thinking about it in terms of relationship.
Relationship.
Yes. It asks, who does this belong to? And has permission been given? When you view it that way, staying in your lane isn't about being limited. It's about being a good neighbor. It's about being in a right relationship with the cultures and people around you.
And that, in a way, probably makes the magic stronger.
You would think so, because you aren't carrying the baggage of exploitation. You're practicing with a clear conscience. You are aligned with your own integrity.
So to recap our mission today, witchcraft is a vast, beautiful landscape, but it's not a free-for-all buffet where you can take whatever looks good.
No. We have open practices that invite us all in, and closed practices that demand our respect from a distance. And understanding the difference protects cultures, ensures safety, and fosters genuine respect.
The source leaves us with this really poetic sentiment. Respect is a form of magic.
I love that line. It implies that the act of setting a boundary and the act of respecting one creates its own kind of sacred energy.
It really does. It changes the vibe from consumption to connection. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, here's a thought I'd love for you to take with you.
Let's hear it.
We've been talking about spirituality, right? But if boundaries are about relationship rather than restriction, how does that change the way you view all knowledge?
Oh, that's interesting.
Think about it. We live in the information age. We think we have a right to know everything, to access everything. But is it possible that true understanding only begins when we accept that not everything is for us to take? What if leaving some mysteries unsolved and some doors closed is actually the key to wisdom?
Wow. That is definitely something to chew on. Not everything is for us, and that is okay.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into sacred boundaries.
It's been a pleasure. Keep asking those hard questions.
We'll catch you on the next one.